Good morning. My name is Richard Newmar. You've seen me before. When Ken and I committed to spending our lives together, and remember this was pre-marriage days, and we began talking about having children, he was clear that he wanted to have a religious community in which to raise them. I had no use for organized religion at that point, having had negative experiences that left a bad taste in my mouth whenever I thought about groups of people gathering to worship together. I did, however, see the value in having a community supporting our family, whatever shape that would take. Ken had experienced UU services before, and so we went online looking for a welcoming congregation here on Long Island. And he dragged me here with just a little kicking and not too much screaming. And my first exposure to this religion was a presentation by a Walt Whitman impersonator. By now, I know the whole, if this is your first time, please come back so you get to figure out what we're all about speech. But at the time, my thought was, well, that was different. When it became clear to us that neither of us was getting pregnant anytime soon, and the one woman who offered to carry a baby for us was, let's just say we figured out that adoption was the best route that we would take to grow our family. We thought we knew what adoption was all about. After all, we'd seen lots of movies and TV shows about it. I mean, you look at the rows of little orphan babies lined up in the nursery, and when the sun ray reflected through the window onto that one baby who happened to be making eye contact with us and smiling, that was our baby. Or, if we decided not to choose a baby, we could comb the big Victorian-style mansion orphanages for a spunky red-headed dog and a Broadway voice. Anybody who knows our family knows how that turned out. We had no clue. We went to adoption classes and to a support group once, but still, real adoption is something that's hard to grasp if your primary frame of reference is, the sun will come out tomorrow. So, that's something that I've learned working as I am as a director of an adoption agency. Many people don't have a full understanding of what it means to adopt, because it isn't just about fulfilling your dream to find the perfect child. It's about bringing another whole human being into your life, making them yours as if they were born to you, and making a forever commitment that will never change, but that will change you. How wonderful it was then for us that the process of learning about adoption and then adopting, and in doing so learning so much more as we grew our family, ran parallel to our spiritual journey as UUs. What we discovered is that no matter what anyone's religion may be, the process that one undergoes in adoption is an exquisite expression of our religion's principles. And that's what I want to share with you this morning. Adoption through the lens of Unitarian Universalism. Our first principle is an affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, which of course reminds me of the game show Wheel of Fortune. I was watching one night as Pat Sajak was asking the contestants to introduce themselves. My name is Tim, I have a beautiful wife Betty, and a son Josh who's in college, and I live in Los Angeles with my wonderful husband, and I'm a civil engineer. Standard stuff. Until the third contestant said, my name is Abby, I live in Los Angeles with my wonderful husband Bill, and our two adopted daughters Christine and Debbie. My reaction was immediate and visceral. I remember turning to a relative of mine who was watching with me and saying, I hope I never hear anyone in my family say anything like that. But she didn't catch it. Did you? What was wrong with that, she said. I couldn't put it into words then, but I have grown to understand that what I was feeling in the context of being a UU. Abby was not recognizing the fullness of the inherent worth and dignity of her daughters. For whatever reason she had for announcing to the audience that her children were adopted, she immediately categorized them differently than she would have if she had simply said, our daughters. Unless a parent is speaking specifically about adoption and adoption issues, which we do find ourselves doing quite frequently, like this morning, By labeling Christine and Debbie the way she did, she revealed that she had an inner bias against those girls and did not, in fact, fully embrace them as she would have daughters that she had given birth to. But she held them apart, slightly, as something different. That bias compromises the dignity of the children in the speaker's mouth and in the listener's ears. They somehow don't have inherent worth and dignity equal to children born into a family. One of the most wonderful gifts I think a parent can be given is to hear someone say, "Oh, I didn't even realize your child was adopted." When I hear that, it's a recognition that I have so taken my children into my heart and into my life that their relationship with me and mine with them is no different than anyone else's children with their parents, a sign that I am authentically living the first principle. This isn't to say that the fact of a child's adoption should be ignored. Quite the contrary. Within the family, with friends, and when brought up for appropriate discussion, being honest in honoring the way a family came to be is of utmost importance. And, in fact, both personally and professionally, I insist on it. And the reason leads us to the second and third principles. We teach justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, as well as acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. None of this can happen in an adopted family unless we recognize that no matter what age our children came to us, they had lives before, whether incredibly brief or for far too many years, that had nothing to do with us. Denying that is the same as cutting off their arm or leg. It is part of who our children are and always will be. This doesn't mean it must be a daily topic of conversation around the dinner table, so let's talk about adoption tonight. But we all have within us the need for a who I am personal narrative, one that we understand and that belongs to us. And part of that narrative includes where I came from. For a sapling, growth requires strong roots, and it is the same for spiritual growth in our children. Adopted children are not snapped off at the stem and stuck in a vase on someone else's table. They were uprooted, sometimes gently and sometimes not, but uprooted nonetheless. They were carried to a new garden and then carefully transplanted into prepared soil, pressed in, watered, and watched to see how they would blossom. But remember, their roots are still there. They must be for survival to be possible. Ignoring the circumstances that brought a child to be adopted is to ask the entire family to live a lie. It is a deep and meaningful gift of compassion and acceptance to a child when their parents, instead of adhering to some selfish need for isolation or ownership, can say to them, "You are a whole person, and your history is now our history." It helps the roots to find purchase in the new garden and encourages growth. And this flows very nicely into our fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Adoption is a wonderful experience, full of love and hope, but we should never forget the heartbreaking truth that adoption would not be possible without profound loss. There's an understanding in the psychology world that even if a baby was adopted as a newborn, never having consciously known his or her birth parents, they experience the trauma of separation and abandonment. Babies are not simply empty vessels waiting to be filled, or lumps of clay who are unmolded until we start to push and prod them into shapes that we can recognize. They are aware of sounds in the womb, and they feel the familiar rhythm of their birth mother's heartbeat. They are oriented by their prenatal experiences. They are bonded to their birth mother, and when that primary bond is broken, they experience loss and abandonment, although they have no words or understanding of what that means. Many of the stories of an adopted child describing as adults having grown up with feelings of longing or of something missing that they could never quite figure out. And of course, older children from disrupted homes are faced with the recognizable experience of a birth family who abandons them. And make no mistake about this, although it may have been the police or CPS or a social worker or a judge who actually separated them, The experience for the child, either consciously or unconsciously, is that their family did not choose them over the drugs or the violence or the other relationships that got them removed. They didn't fight for them. They didn't want them. That's the experience. There is that time in our lives when we realize that we have a personal narrative, but we don't have all of the details. Those details that we need to fill in our narrative progresses as we get older. At first, where did I come from? Is a general question about where babies come from. But before long, it begins to take on a personal meaning. Where was I born? Progressing into, how did mom and dad meet? And what were they like as kids? In school, there is always that day where we explore our heritage, and we suddenly understand that people are Irish, or Italian, or German. And what am I leads to, who are my ancestors? PBS just launched a new show where people are asking experts to trace their family trees, and Ancestry.com is doing bang-up business. Along the way, we want a better and better answer to the question, who am I? A search for truth and meaning in the present and for our future is helped immeasurably by an understanding of the truth of our pasts and the meaning our history holds for each of us. For an adoptee, especially those adopted as newborns, some of those narrative questions can't be answered. And there are a few questions that they face that we may never have to. Not only who are my people, but why didn't my people keep me? Why didn't my people want me? Not every adopted child will seek their birth parents, but in getting to know themselves, who could help but at least entertain these questions in passing? On the other hand, for some, it becomes a driving force. It is a defining moment in an adoptive relationship when a child asks those questions, and the parent should understand that their child is not questioning them as parents. They are trusting their parents enough that they feel safe making themselves vulnerable to their truth, a truth that may be difficult to hear, and then looking for help in figuring out whatever meaning it brings to them. And in helping their children to navigate through the self-discovery process, making sure it is a responsible search, parents are also honoring the fifth principle, acknowledging their child's right to follow their own conscience, and with loving support to make their own decision about how far to go and when, until they are satisfied with their understanding of themselves. Our sixth and seventh principles go hand in hand where adoption is concerned. To put a twist on the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a community to make an adoption happen. Adopting family, birth family, social workers, foster families, agencies, attorneys, judges, they all have to work together with a common goal, to allow one family to lovingly and forever take over the raising of another family's child. It's almost a throwback to some long-ago cultures where fostering children to be raised by a nursemaid or in groups was not unusual. In fact, it was expected. The difference is that in those days, birth and foster families, teachers and leaders all kept the web of the community unbroken. Adoption laws these days keep records sealed. So although many parties have a hand in the process, some are cut out of the web. But with the internet, and especially Facebook, it is increasingly easy to pull the threads back together again. Parents need to be more careful monitoring their children's internet use. They should be careful anyway, of course, but there is a bigger burden on adoptive parents to make sure that their children are ready for whatever they may find out about themselves or contacts they may make with their past. Because we do want this worldwide community to give our children the opportunity to find closure, satisfaction, resolution, or understanding, but the risk is great. Although many of us know adoption stories, the truth is that many people are never touched by adoption. While an estimated 30% of families consider adoption at some time, only about 2% actually go forward and adopt. Statistics tell us, as we heard earlier during Joys and Concerns, what happens to children who age out of the system without a forever family, and it's not pretty. Joblessness, homelessness, incarceration, drug use, unplanned pregnancy, the proportion of these dangers is way too high for emancipated children, which basically means children who never found a forever family. Not every family can or wants to adopt. Not every family should adopt. But we can all have an understanding of what adoption really means and find some way in words or deeds or donations to support adoption. If we recognize that every child has the right to a loving forever family, we must embrace the fact that it is the responsibility of our whole society to make sure that no child is left abandoned and alone. In order to care for the web of all existence, we must protect and support the most vulnerable among us. And so for Ken and me, bringing our children into our family has been the most complete, fulfilling, and authentic way that we have been able to live our UU values.